Hi, this is Eric, and welcome to this presentation on naming and style conventions for Objective-C. So the audience for this video is for people brand new to Objective-C, and you just might be a student in the UW Extension's Mac and iOS Dev Certificate, and I just might be grading your papers. So let's go to the first slide. So with naming basics, really don't be afraid of long names. I'd really like long descriptive names rather than very short terse names that are hard to read. And please don't use underscores in your names. So Objective-C is really kind of the German of programming languages, where you get really long method definitions, and there's nothing embarrassing about having some insanely long but descriptive names. So please don't do any abbreviations in your names. Common programming practice, I think, is to write everything out. It only takes a couple seconds to write a good name. And remember, after you write that, you have autocomplete working for you. There's Xcode has a lot of tools to help you rename quickly, and I would suggest always renaming a method or attribute whenever you think of a better name. So for variable names, it's tempting to start using things like temp or I or whatever you think of, but I often find the best approach is just to repeat whatever that property name is. So it keeps it really simple. There's no chance of a naming collision, and you know exactly what you're working with. So with IB outlets, I think it's really important to end the name of the IB outlet in the name of the control that you're creating that outlet for, and have some description before that. So just remember, a descriptive name plus control name, and you'll never have to wonder what kind of IB outlet you're trying to use. So by default, IB outlets are weak. When you control drag from your control to your source file, you'll see that it comes out with the weak attribute. It's actually better to have non-atomic weak, so go ahead and modify that. And you definitely don't want to leave it, or if you do create your own IB outlets, you don't want to leave it blank, because that'll just default to strong atomic, which you don't really want for outlets. You always want weak outlets. So please, please, please always use properties. People don't really use instance variables anymore, and you'll see I put ivars up there, and you'll hear that in Objective-C, and that just means instance variable. So please don't use instance variables, though you will see it in quite a few textbooks. But these days, it's really fallen out of favor for properties. So sometimes you'll be using convenience constructors, which will return the type of object. It'll construct an object and return it for you, and it'll save you some typings so you don't have to type out alloc and init yourself. So in the top example, we see it's returning a person object, which is fine, because that's the type of object you want to have returned. Below you see a somewhat newer way of doing it, which is using the instance type keyword, which we'll learn about later. So please don't use the or my before your variables. It's really tempting, but I'd rather just find another descriptive way to name your variables. So this slide is about the NS text field control, and I show a lot of names that I do not prefer, because they just won't be clear when I go to use that IB outlet. And actually, all these are IB outlets to that control on the Zib. So especially things like my meeting box, there's actually a control called NS box. And if I had to guess, I would think it was an NS box IB outlet. And once again, you'll see that I would prefer for all of these to end in text field. Note that on Interface Builder there is the label control. So if you are using a label control, which is actually just kind of a read-only text field, you'll see that the type of the control is actually an NS text field, but you could go ahead and end that with label. So instead of like title text field, you could just call that title label. So here are some IB outlets for NS buttons, and once again, just please end with the name of the control and start with something descriptive that tells me what that button is used for. You'll often use NS image views on your zibs to show an image, and every image view has an internal NS image. So it's really tempting for people to call this image or image view, but it's really good just to, and maybe it's because the name seems kind of long, but it's good to have some kind of description plus image view at the end. In one of the please don't examples, I have the name image view, and you really don't want to do that, because when you start using control names that are basically the same name as the control, there's a high likelihood that you'll collide with how Apple likes to name their controls internally. And here's an example of NSTableViewCell. And so this is the header file for that control, and you'll see Apple has two IB outlets to an NS text field and an NS image view inside that. One is called text field, one is called image view. And if you named yours the same thing, you could hide their implementation. This is kind of one of those examples where you actually can use the name of the control. And it's usually because it's something simple like view or table view. And usually you don't have more than one table view per form. And if you do, it's going to be a search table view. So this is one case where you really don't need that extra descriptor before the actual name. Objective-C has type defs for a lot of common scalar types, and you should really use them for better code portability between 32-bit and 64-bit platforms. You may notice that in the properties they have two attributes, non-atomic assign. You should always name your properties, or your scalar properties, non-atomic. And while assign is the default, by throwing assign in there, it kind of reminds you that it's not a class, it's a scalar value. And sometimes it can be really tempting to throw a star, so NS integer star record, but you don't want a pointer, unless you do, but usually it's an accident, and I wonder why my code's not working, and I end up finding that that's the reason. So please spell out the whole name when you write a variable, because it just makes it easier to read. And I feel it's worth the extra keystrokes. So in this case, we have a very abbreviated variable name. We have a counter and another index path, and it doesn't really tell us a whole lot. And whenever I see a variable and there has to be a comment to explain what it does, that you could usually just bake that comment right into the variable name. So with naming collections, I'm almost okay with all of these. I wouldn't say any of them are really wrong. In this case, I prefer the ones on the bottom. It's always good to have a descriptive name, but I'm not going to be completely lost if I see items. If I'm ever using a collection in code, I tend to like to be a little bit more descriptive. Instead of just having a common name, I will put the name of whatever I'm using at the end. I will say items dictionary or to-do list dictionary, because it really does make it so much easier to remember what type I'm working with. So here's some examples for fast enumeration. I usually just like to repeat the name of the class except in lowercase. If autocomplete is giving you pains, you could try this variation on the bottom. So formatters you use a lot in Objective-C, and the two most common seem to be NS number formatters and NS date formatters. You'll often have both in the same project, so it's really good to be able to tell them apart. If you just say formatter, you won't really know if you're dealing with a number formatter or date formatter, and some people get confused and think it's the same thing. Usually you only have one formatter per class because they're so expensive to create. So you'll create one and keep it around for a while. So you'll use constants in your code, especially when you have a dictionary and you use a string as a key to put in information and pull out information. So the preferred style is shown there, but you'll often see that other style that Apple often uses in their code. When you do use a constant, it'll normally go in the .m file, and that's usually where your code will be. So that's where you'll use your your const, but if you do need to have external visibility for that, go ahead and in the .h file you'll use the extern keyword. And then any files including that header file will be able to see that variable. Enums are good for switch statements. I'd much rather see this in code rather than, -1 or something that looks like a magic number. Now on properties, the order of attributes don't really matter. It could be strong atomic or non-atomic strong. Some people like putting non-atomic first because it kind of lines up everything nicely in code. So I think it's best practice now to always include non-atomic, and there can be a performance improvement when you use non-atomic over the default, which is atomic. And you can use atomic whether or not you're using a reference where you need strong, or you're using a scalar type where you have a sign, or you're using a bool, an integer, or a float. So methods that don't return values are often doing some action, so it's good to start with a verb and then add some description after that. Methods that do return values, I find it's often good to start with the name of the thing being returned. So in this case, I've just thrown up a couple methods to talk about how I like to write methods. I like for the curly braces of the body to be vertically aligned, and I usually put a space after that first class or instance method identifier. I like a space between the actual type and the star, but besides those, I don't like spaces. So here's an example where I have my method body braces lined up, but when I use an if statement or a switch statement or a for in statement, I use the K and R style, just like it's shown there. Sometimes in older code you will see parameters with a lowercase a in the name, and that is an older style. It was used to prevent naming collisions a long time ago. So your controls will often have IB actions that are fired when they are pressed or some interaction occurs. So I have two options here. The top one has the action that the event will do. Let's say that's a button press, and start game is what it does. And below we have press start game button. Now this is, to me, this is nice and descriptive, and it tells me exactly what control is calling this IB action method. I'll often use the example on the bottom. However, the option on the top is, I think it's more popular in code, and it doesn't really tie you to a certain control. If you have a menu item and a button that both call the same IB action method, and remember, you can have multiple controls calling this, connected to the same IB action method. In that case, the top version is best. So when I lay out my classes, I usually like to have a single space between items. I like to group all my properties together and all my methods together and just have a single space between them all. And I think this is a common style to keep the properties on top and then bunch the methods below them. So getters and setters are a little different in Objective-C. When you write a add property, it comes with a built-in getter and setter. The difference that I see with other languages is you don't go get name, for example. You'll just use the term name. So in this case, you would go self.name, and that would return the value. When you have public variables, they go in the .h file, and that makes a lot of sense. But when you have private variables in Objective-C, they actually go in the .m file in something called a class extension. And if you do have private methods, you won't even need to put the declarations in your class extension. They don't need a declaration at the top of the file. You could just write the method in the .m file. Bool is a special type that you'll use in Objective-C, and it's all caps, B-O-O-L, and that's the one you want to use. Without going into too much detail, it's very customary to write it as a property with the non-atomic assign identifier, and go ahead and create a getter name for that in your attribute list. So when you need to check the value, it'll be like, you'll check the isTired method on your object, so self.isTired, and when you do assign it, you'll just go self-tired equals yes. I think writing in a good style lessens the cognitive load required to program, and when you have really good names, it's not even like programming. It almost seems too easy, and you can focus on the important things rather than remembering, what this thing is that you named. I never count off points based on a style. Objective-C is brand new for most of you, and if you learn the style along with the language, I think it'll be easier for you to program in this language. So Xcode has a lot of really handy tools to help you refactor. The top one, where you select a word and go, edit, refactor, rename, you can either select the word and right click, or you can go up to the menu. This will rename a variable everywhere, so it's very effective, where you could rename something and not have to worry that it's not renamed in another source file. A faster way to do it, but within a defined scope of whatever curly braces you're coding in, is to use the special shortcut of select that word and hitting Command-Control-E, and you can type and see everything getting renamed. This is a great way to rename any local variables. I personally don't fight Xcode's formatting. I let it, there's a lot of great autocomplete you just have to get used to. Whenever I'm typing, an if statement, you type an if, and then I hit tab or enter. I can't remember exactly what I do. And then I'll be ready to put in my condition. And to me, it really speeds things up. If you're asking a technical question related to your code, it's a lot easier and time efficient for me to, take the time to find out what the problem is if you're naming everything in a proper manner. I do find that people that do best in the class are the ones that pick up these style conventions more quickly. And I think that if you follow the style guide in here, you'll be writing nice standard code that everybody could read. So thanks a lot for making it through this long presentation, and I hope it lets you write better code faster and more enjoyably. So thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.